On the run.
on the
Or in
run.
between.
So
Yeah.
in
Awesome.
between. So if you're cool with me doing it in my car,
I,
it's a little
I,
it's windy and cold outside. So
I'm totally fine with that, Bill. I want to pick your mind, so I don't care where
yes.
you are. So,
Well, I appreciate it, man.
oh, awesome.
Yours
Yeah,
was
I
a.
truly
It's funny
appreciate it.
that you reached out to me because yours was a podcast that I was going to reach out
Oh,
to
awesome.
see if I could talk because I really enjoy what you do.
Awesome.
So
Wow, that's great
thank
to
you
hear.
for having me
Awesome.
on.
Well, I truly appreciate it. When folks like you, I consider you in the realm of Steve Cotter with these folks who really paved the way for us younger guys to keep moving with the kettlebell. And that really inspires me when I hear guys like you say, "Hey, man, I wanted to reach out to you."
Well,
That's really flattering. Awesome. Oh,
well,
may I
thanks.
ask, what's your day job next to the?
So I train, right? But
Yeah.
I am in charge of the Pilates department
Ah.
for this Lifetime Fitness in
Mm.
Omaha, Nebraska. And so I've been doing. So I've been. Oops. All right. Yeah, I've been in the fitness industry for in. It's kind of weird because in June of next year will be like 30 years. So
Wow.
I started real young. I was like 12 and
Wow.
worked in like a rehab place where the guy had qualified for the 84 Olympics and Olympic weightlifting. So I
Wow.
learned to snatch and clean and jerk before I learned how to like bench press or like, classic, like what you would go to the gym to traditionally do. And
Mm.
so that kind of, and we did a ton of like essentially like rehab or prehab type stuff. So people had like chronic back pain and knee pain and it just things like that. And then you'd get athletes uh and other various, just like you do in training.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that started off my career. And so I've
Wow.
been at this for a
Wow.
long time now.
So
So
that means massive amounts of experience, right? That's.
yeah,
Mm.
yes, yeah. And
Mm.
I've been fortunate to be exposed to a lot of really, really smart people um and to have just been able to learn
Mm.
a lot,
Mm.
and to do, something I love doing.
Awesome.
It's such a um can be such a rewarding job, right?
Yeah, most
You know.
definitely. And it's just,
So
when you talk to the right people, I see it now with this podcast thing that I'm doing, where I get to talk to these people, where the amount of learning that you get when you talk to experts in their fields, it's like you can count it in dog years. 1 year is like 7 years. It takes
yeah,
you it takes you so far. And every time I talk to kettlebell legends and people who just who are heavyweights in this game, the learning experience gets drastically improved and accelerated. And then when I do the coaching, it's just, we focus on beginners, and you have such a huge arsenal of tools and knowledge how you can
right.
help them. That's just, it's the funny thing is, it gets the least amount of views on the channel, but I love it the most because I get so much out of it. I truly
Yeah, no,
appreciate it.
I believe it. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah. I got to talk with David Weck, the
Yeah.
guy and that was fascinating.
Mm.
Really, really fascinating because he's doing a lot of really interesting things, especially with like
Mm-hmm.
gait mechanics
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like, and once you kind of when you understand what he's doing, you're like, oh, that's really logical. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
like what he's setting up is really, really logical, and I think really overlooked in as
Mm-hmm.
far as like the mechanics go. Of he has like a basically like a what you'd call like a double down like hand swing is one of his big things. Like when you pulse into the ground, like when you're swinging your arms to run, he has it so that you're pulsing
that-
down,
that-
yeah,
yeah,
that
I saw
you're
that.
trying to
Yeah.
increase like the force, and then, you know, how you're lining up. And so he, you know, really exploring and looking at like lateral flexion of the spine, and then how that again also translates into rotation, and how, you know, in many sport, or you'd go with just even fitness, a lot of that is neglected, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in general fitness, kettlebells, it's a little different, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's such a, there's a lot of rotation and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
side bending, even if you don't necessarily know that it's going on.
Mm.
But David's really stepping onto that, and so to that point, it was you gain so much from just these conversations
Mm-hmm.
of talking
Mm-hmm.
about it and being able to
Most
explore
definitely.
ideas.
And
Yeah.
let's just stick with rotation, because, and that's one of the many reasons I was really looking forward to talking to you. Because my premise, as far as I understand it, I'm a huge fan of the basic movements, and I do believe, and when I talk to Dan John and all these heavyweights, they kind of tend to gravitate to the same idea that most people just need the basics, right? Just swings, snatch, press. So, you know, especially when it comes to kettlebells, right? Deadlift,
Yeah.
squat, press, you're safe, right? And when I watch you, you're very into rotational exercises. And me watching this, coming from my understanding of the basics, your stuff seems different. So that's why I really want to pick your brain on this idea. How much about just rotational in general, because, and then you can just take it from there whenever you want. Because I've also had a conversation with Professor McGill, and one thing that I learned from him when it comes to the spine is, if you rotate with strength and not with a lot of velocity and heavy weight, you're safe. Yet, if you start rotating with high velocity and heavy weights, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So what's your take on this? Because when it comes to rotational exercises, you wanted to go two guys, right?
Sure.
Especially kettlebells, right?
So this is a very, right, this kind of becomes a loaded question to a certain degree.
Mm.
And the first off, the question is with rotation is like, who are you working with and who's your client,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or who
Mm-hmm.
are you, right? Like, because you have to handle the basics, like vertical, you know, straight on lines of like, can they find, what's their lumbopelvic rhythm like?
Mm-hmm.
How do they breathe? Do they know how to breathe down? Can they control their rib angle, right? Or are they constantly breathing out of the neck, which then throws off everything else? So that stacking of the spine is really, really, like, that's the first thing I'm always looking for. Stacking the spine, and can they breathe down? Preferably, can they breathe down with doing nose breathing, but really, can you just breathe down? Because when you breathe down, as you drop that diaphragm, and if you can keep the ribs down, right? One, you keep a neutral, what would be like rib angle. Two, you start actually stabilizing the lumbar spine. So if you think about the spine like a bullwhip, the lumbar spine is the handle of the bullwhip.
I love that description. You said that in Steve Cotter's interview. I love that.
Yeah. And what happens for most of us is that spine gets kinked. And what happens is our thoracic spine, which is really stable, but can have a lot more mobility because of all the ribs being around it. And this is where respiration and breathing come into play. Learning to expand your ribs east and west makes a big difference. Because if you're constantly just elevating ribs up, ribs down, you're relying heavily on the scalenes, and that changes first rib angle. Wow. And then it changes shoulder angle, and it then starts to expose the ribs. So like a lot of times, you know, when you have someone reach overhead, I'm like in my car, so I can't do it, but like you'll see the ribs flare up with it, and you see them dump into the low back, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, what happens is that basically, because they haven't practiced moving that thoracic spine or getting those muscles around there to reverse the C curve, they can't get into proper overhead position.
Most definitely. I see this. So many times. Yeah, especially when people start extending, it's they tilt up.
Yes.
And then they even look to the ceiling like this, right? So that's what
Right,
you're referring
right.
to, right? Yeah.
So they're not actually moving through their shoulder, they're moving through their lumbar spine. And it's like if you had a bullwhip and you kept bending the handle of the bullwhip, the ability for that bullwhip to crack becomes less and less because it doesn't have as stable of a base. So by the time you get to the cervical spine, it has a ton of mobility. Like, I mean, like it can go in all types of directions and, and that is essentially, if you think about the body, everything important is up here and the body will adjust the rest of everything else because how you breathe, how you think, how you see, smell, eat, all of that is here. And it'll do whatever it can to keep your bite as in one bite, like in one chomp. Like if you see like a person that has like cerebral palsy, like they'll be like crooked, but they're crooked and their head is square. Because the rest of it, even though they've thrown everything else out of whack, but they're keeping the most important neurological thing square. So before you get into rotation, that's kind of the first thing that you have to address. And so how I typically will address this, and I don't address this at all on my like Instagram page, because for the most part, people are there to either get ideas for what to do with the kettlebell, or they want like that like workout or whatever. But like when you get into like my programming, all my programming includes what I call a developmental warm-up. And how that works is and so basically there's gifts given to you at birth that set you up to be bipedal, and no one teaches them to you. I mean, no one teaches them to you, otherwise your gait would probably be a mess when you're a child. And so the thing is first is breath, then you go into global flexion. So like the baby's on their back and they're kicking, they're grabbing their legs. Maybe they're starting to do happy babies, which essentially is setting you up for a squat position. They're grabbing their toes and their feet and they're crunching up. And we do this for like 9 to 12 months before we walk, right? Then we roll, which develops right, left side brain coordination. Then we come to global extension. So we start creating that extension of the upper spine. And when you look at that, like those babies can really bring that sternum and heart forward without sometimes, I mean, as they get like stronger and stronger, without kinking the neck a ton, even up in the cervical spine. And they, they kind of do things that look like swimmers. And then they come to a crawl and a sit, and like sitting on the floor starts to teach you to separate your hips from your femur, and you start to stack your spine. And then we go into a squat. But you typically squat before you stand, and then you pull yourself to a stand. Then you get into all the gait pattern. And that's where like all the Weck stuff really interests me, because then it becomes this, now you're starting to use a lot more. I mean, you're using lateral movement of the spine, but now it's a stacked vertical lateral movement of the spine, of where you're lining your head up over the hip joint, over the knee, over the ball of the foot as you gait. And so what's really interesting is going into rotational movement is like your classic GS snatch. And you can break this down in numerous ways. There's guys like Sergey Rudnev, who they do more rotation, but they have a hip shift from like in the back. So if I'm snatching with my right hand in the backswing, I'm going to load my left hip in the backswing.
Most definitely.
And then as I'm coming up, I'm going to load my right. And so it becomes this like rotate, and then you square underneath. If you watch, like go to his,
what I feel, if I may just jump in,
go ahead,
in real quick. When I do the GS snatch, right? The gear voice snatch, I feel this 100%. When I do it with my right arm, I go down, and once I come up, I use all the force of my left glutes. And if I snatch with my left hand, I use all the force of my right glutes. And that even allows for this foot kick technique of your other leg to increase the time that your arm is connected to your hip, to transfer as much force as possible into your arm to bring the weight up, right? So I always feel this, I loved it. That's why I love this snatch so much, because it's this diagonal movement, right? If
Right.
you look at it like this, especially in the backswing and when you come back
Yes.
up, and when you square, you're solid, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's interesting, so that's one technique. Now, another technique is single side loading. And I think if you watch kind of that Ivan Markov or even Ivan Denisov,
Mm-hmm.
they both kind of have a similar single side. Like, so if I was swinging with my left hand, right,
Mm-hmm.
my right side is the side that's always loaded. So they come back and they're loaded in the right side. And then when they come up, they're staying pretty much
Yeah.
kind of over that same side. And so
Yeah,
it ends
yeah.
up
I see
being
this.
this diagonal pattern.
Yeah,
Only on one,
diagonal.
there's not this X transition. So of shifting side to side. Part of it's probably due to they're both bigger athletes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's also a lot of single side mechanics in a lot of sports. So like I have a buddy of mine who I work with, this Ken Boatwright, who was a defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks. And he was talking about the technique of when you went through, you did a single side run. So like you were always loaded on that one hip as you cut through. And he was like, when David and I brought this up, David brought this up to me, Ken and I then sparked this conversation of talking about, he goes, yeah, guys that knew how to run on one side were always faster off the line and could get through the line quicker because they could keep that same side down pulse and generate more power that way.
And how can I imagine running on one side? Is it just
So
leading the
it's,
weights?
I wish I could, so like basically it would be as if you always loaded, like if I was on my left side, let's just say I'm always going to load my left side and I'm going to stay over that side. So like you have one leg that's essentially kind of the more power leg and the other leg's the follow through.
And so you're shifting your center of mass, right?
Over that hip, over that leg.
Huh.
And you're, and they're doing this double down post. Now, I don't know if it's actually faster or not. This is completely debatable. And what I would say is, I can spitball about it, but I would say it's out of my realm of real expertise. You'd probably need to talk to track coaches and David and other people, but that's something David's exploring. And it was just interesting to me that Ken, who was a Super Bowl champ with the Seattle Seahawks, was like, yeah, he goes, I noticed that.
Wow.
That's a big technique that we use. Wow. And so in Kettlebell Sport, I'm still talking about rotation here.
Yeah.
But
just keep going whatever you want. I'm just listening. So interesting.
So what's really interesting and how I connected to Kettlebell Sport was I was an Olympic weightlifter. And when I saw Kettlebell Sport, I go, oh, this is endurance Olympic weightlifting. And historically, the craziest thing about it is that is exactly what it is. When it came out of the school or the club for strong men in Russia and like
from the circus,
right? Well, it wasn't necessarily even a circus thing. It was their Olympic weightlifting and Kettlebell Sport originated in the exact same spot. One was the power end and the other was the endurance or work end. And so these techniques of stacking the spine and relaxed tension.
Yeah, I love this.
Are universal across both. Because like when an Olympic weightlifter does not come to the bar the same way that a power lifter does. No one goes to them and goes, get tight. You don't say that because rhythm and timing are so important.
Wow.
And so you have to come to the bar and you have to pull slack out of the body and get that myofascial system fully loaded, fully ready to spring.
Wow.
And then you got to generate power.
Yeah.
But your breath is relaxed. You're moving and you're waiting for the timing of the kinetics of the bar if you're going to the clean to bring you back and up out of the hole. It is the very same for Kettlebell Sport, but people don't understand the mechanics or where the weight is being displaced, especially like in the long cycle or the jerk, because automatically everybody goes, oh my gosh, you're going to break your back.
Yeah, yeah. They
You know what I
always
mean?
did it.
Like
Yeah.
I can't tell you how
Yeah,
often
yeah.
I've had
Oh,
those
me too.
conversations.
Me
You know,
too.
you're
On
like,
YouTube, you know, I started so
yes,
heavy on
oh
YouTube.
yes,
Everybody was like, "You want to break your spine? You're gonna destroy your lower back. You're gonna do this." And the funny thing is, if I may just jump in real quick,
please do.
I found this very interesting website in Russian, but it was one article in English, and this is where the guy completely dissected the idea of a rational position where you rack the elbows on the iliac crest of your hip.
Yes,
You shift the weight forward, so you make sure that the weight of the bells go in front of your hip and in front of your
yes,
knees, so that
yes,
way you bypass the lower back. It's a
yes,
problem if you start pulling it up and start crunching,
yes,
and then the weight gets distributed behind your knees and
yes,
behind your hips. This is where your lower back feels it. And,
yes,
and that's something that I really found so incredibly interesting. Once you understand these very complex mechanics,
yes.
then you understand where these guys are getting the energy from. It's all
Right,
hips. And that's the reason why
right.
why lighter weights like me, you know, I'm 70 kilos.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I see Russian champions 68 kilos moving those 32s.
yeah.
And it's like, how is this even possible?
Yes,
It's
and that is the thing, and it's actual, like what they're looking for is work capacity. The beauty, I always said, the beauty of kettlebell sport, or this is just my humble opinion on it, and the reason it's a military sport is because it's how much work can you do under duress, how calm can you stay,
ooh.
and like when you're really hitting it, there's a real zen spot. Because I remember watching like Sergey Merkelin, and
Yeah.
Merkelin
Yeah.
looks the same from beginning to end. And you're like, this guy's got ice in his veins. I mean, he has
How does he do
absolute
it? It's
ice
crazy.
in his veins. I don't understand this.
Wow,
What am I
ice in
watching?
his
Like,
veins. I love
you
this.
know, and so I didn't know, but then, you know, he started breaking it down for me. And he's like, you know, and they just would be like, you have to relax. And you cannot waste anything. It is a game of efficiency. So you can't waste the thought. Like, you have to accept, one, that this is going to hurt,
Mhm.
and accept what that sensation is. And you don't even actually, it's even better when you don't think of it as hurt.
Mhm.
It's just a sensation.
Mhm.
Two, like expressing the pain of it only wastes energy. So
right?
that like that holding it in your face or
Yeah.
whatever, let it go.
Oh, that's even wasting energy. Oh, wow.
Like, let it go, because you're wasting. You're
Yeah,
wasting.
you're wasting.
Focus on the only thing that matters. So like in the long cycle, if you're keeping a pretty fast pace, it's about 7 breaths. It's about 7 breaths from backswing
1,
to
2,
overhead.
3, 4, 5.
Yeah, and if you're taking, so 1 overhead, and then as you drop 1 into the backswing, you know,
Yeah,
or you're taking
yeah.
an extra breath. And so like I
Yeah.
would always just
Yeah.
count breaths. And if you can focus, your breath is the most important thing. And so if you can chunk it down to what's the most important,
Wow.
you can move ahead. And that's what's like, it's truly the beauty of it. Like, it's the absolute beauty of the bell. Listen, the bell is a great strength tool. You can do all types of stuff with it. It's a weight, so you can squat with it. You can goblet squat. You can create dynamic tension. But really what it is, it's this incredible kinetic tool that teaches you rhythm, timing, and how to counter a mass outside of the weight in front of you. And so it is in rhythm and timing, this is where I'm going with this, that you can start to have rotation, because a lot of my rotation occurs with no weight. I might have a 24 kg bell in my hand, and I might be throwing it up over my head and then leaning back into like a windmill or something. But the weight isn't on me until my hips are loaded, and basically it's over my spine and it's pressing me down, and I've caught it in this rhythmic fashion, and I'm not resisting it. So I'm not even putting any pressure on the spine.
Wow. So just to reflect on this.
Yes.
If you wanna get powerful with these rotational exercises that almost look like Russian ballet, right?
Yeah.
Then you have to fully understand the biomechanics, the kinesthetics, and the rhythm of how to move with the kettlebell that you can learn when you engage in kettlebell sport, to really understand breathing, how to move weights, how to tense your abdominals when they're needed, how to relax. I love it. Steve Carter taught me this. He said, I call this the power switch mentality. And I was like, what does that mean? And he said, power switch means when I rack the weights, 220s on my, when I'm getting ready for the jerk, my upper body's slightly relaxed, but my lower body is tense. Once I go up, and I love this, and I saw this from Dennis, once I go in a top fixation, and then this is the crazy thing is, you rack the weight on your frame, right? So it's on top, you rack the weight, you use skeletal support, and then when you go into full top fixation, so coming out of the hole from the second dip, you relax your quads.
Yeah.
And then you come back, boom, and you tense them again. So it's this, and I heard this. Somebody said the body loves it when you contract and relax, contract and relax, and that's exactly what the kettlebell teaches you. Yeah. So you have to have this basic understanding of how to move with kettlebells, especially as efficient as possible, before you want to get into this rotational idea. Am I correct, or am I missing something?
Yeah, no, 100%. And here's the thing is that and you can pick whatever style of GS snatch you want, where you're kind of staying on one side, you're transitioning, but if you learn to snatch, which keeps the bell within the center of mass, there's a lot of rotation that goes on there. And if you practice that and get really good at that, like I didn't start doing a ton of these big rotational movements. I mean, I'd play around with stuff, but I really didn't start doing them until, I don't know, like whenever I guess it was COVID. So 2020, mid-20, like where like I'd start, I mean, like you pretty much can look on my thing and I'd be like, let's see what it looks like this. But it was because I understood the concept of countering weight and transitioning. I understood how to like load a side or load the other and breathe and relax, that I was able to pull it off and go into all these other baseline movements while moving the kettlebell. So like, obviously, like if you're going to do a snatching lunge, you should know how to lunge first. And you should know how to snatch, right? I mean, and so, when you start to put like, it's not something that like, when I work with people, like I focus on the very basic stuff. Like we're going to get this, we're going to sharpen your eye, because then when you get to start doing more complex, more what, people think is fun, you can do it, and you can do it very safely. And it's actually like, it's my belief, because the longer that I've done this, like I've gotten more mobile and more like flexible and resilient in odd positions. That's what I wanted to ask, Bill.
Benefits of reaching that level of athleticism, and then tempering with these rotational ideas. What could be, or what do you see the benefits if we have somebody just practicing, staying with the basics, and somebody who has the basics down pat and now starts playing with this idea of adding rotation, or like the snatch and the lunge, or how you do with the snatch and then the windmill, or whatever.
Right, or any of that stuff, right?
Yeah, any of that stuff. Yeah.
So much well, I mean, one, you want to start with a weight that you can handle, right? So, I mean, 12, 16, 8, whatever it is, right? Because so much is really just about getting timing and rhythm. And too often in fitness, in strength coaches' rooms and things like that, the metric that we look at is weight. And you're like, that guy's so strong, he's got like a 32 kilo bell, like whatever, right? Like, when you look at like the programming for a lot of these, like if you follow any of these like kettlebell sport athletes, like a lot of times they're doing a lot of practices with a less weight.
Yeah, again, with double 16s. Master of sports with double 16s. I'm like, what? Yeah.
Yes, and they're working rhythm, timing, positioning, all that stuff, because they need to drill it and they need to mold the body into doing that. And so those same molding principles you need to do, and you need to like slowly rep up and rep down, because you will start extending outside of, you'll start a new stimulus essentially, right? And it doesn't matter what type, like if you're doing a cross body snatch, it's not the same as a regular snatch or a GS snatch. It's similar to the GS snatch,
where you go
but it's
down
exaggerated
and then back up, right?
Yes. But it's also like, the thing is, it's all in the timing. If you disrupt the timing on that, like it's not good. It's really not good. But when you have the timing of it, then there's ways to stage it out. it's a beautiful thing. And also understanding when to, like, you're done, which is true of anything that you do, right? Like, just when you, like, sometimes when guys are squatting, right? Like, they're fatigued. Their CNS is done.
And it's a great exercise, but you should know when to quit, even with the basics or the great exercises, right?
Right. You know, and so there's, I just always think there's so many stages to learning things and understanding, right? Like, you know, Pavel taught us, you know, irradiating strength and introduced the kettlebell, but I believe, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but what it appears to me is that he took like powerlifting principles and applied them to a submaximal tool.
Oh,
so like
interesting perspective. Yeah. Wow.
Right. Like, I think he's a great strength coach, and I think he's done more for kettlebells than anyone
most
around.
Definitely. Yeah. Most
you know,
definitely.
so like, I hope this doesn't come off as if I'm speaking,
and you know, Bill,
I have a lot of admiration.
And even if, you know, I think what I love about when you talk to professionals like you are, and people who are very knowledgeable, is even if we don't agree in some places, doesn't take away from the merit that this person has, right? We may differ on ideas. I believe even with Pavel, you know, I believe if it wasn't for him, many of us wouldn't have even discovered the kettlebell. Maybe even Steve Cotter, who then went to Russia and came back. What I call now, he's one of the original hybrids who came up with sport and hardstyle and melted it together, right? So but I see where you're coming from. Yeah, it's
and so but these are great principles to understand, and you can do those skills with barbells, with dumbbells, with everything. But from the standpoint of the kettlebell, because of its weight displacement, of the weight being further away from the handle, it lends itself to be this very kinetic tool.
I love it.
And so it's kind of, I compare it, and I'm not saying like, so one, especially when training beginners, it's like, it's one of my favorite things to use: goblet squats, deadlifts, all those things, because you can keep it so tight to your center of mass, right? Yeah. It's beautiful, and you can teach this very simple, and by simple, I'm not trying to say that they're easy, but just concepts of hip hinge, right? Like a kettlebell swing, what's great about it is it has, no matter how you do it, it has rhythm. And it starts to actually reinforce your lumbopelvic rhythm. Wow. And that's huge for all sports, all lifting styles, everything. But that being said, the tool is a much, much better tool for kinetic and repetitive and cyclical activities, if that makes sense, because it's always submaximal. Here's the thing: like, you could have a 200, 300 pound kettlebell, but if that's all you're deadlifting, your deadlift sucks. Like, I mean, like, and I'm not like trying to be, but like, you're not like, it ends like, you know, no power lifter is going to respect that. But like, if you learn to move it for multiple reps, that becomes something else, and that requires a different technique. Because I mean, as we've all found out, trying to do, you know, a very tense technique to produce a high volume of work, it doesn't work out. You have to stop.
And this is where I even draw the line to show beginners. I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
Oh, please.
But this is where I teach beginners, or where I tell people, this is where you see these differences when you look at these different types of swings. You know, when Steve visited us and certified us in both IKFF and CKT 1 and 2, he taught us the hand-to-hand swing. And over time, I developed the sense of idea that if you do the hardstyle swing, right? I learned this from Luca, from Hardstyle Kettlebell Pro and Kettlebell Hardstyle Pro, and he always says, you know, strong first, hardstyle swing means you favor heavy weights, and if we favor heavy weights with full tension, maximum tension, that means we can't do it for time. Obviously, right? You have to do it for reps, and this is where I always draw the line. And I do 48 kilogram hardstyle swings, 40 kilo hardstyle swings, 10 reps, and I stop. right? And even with the movement pattern, there's something that I discovered in the hardstyle swing is not only a hip hinge, they also, especially when they go to heavy weights, they also start bending their knees slightly because of the gravitational pull of the weight. You have to somehow compensate it unless you're very massive. Then your mass overcomes it, right? But in most cases, very intense hardstyle swings means hip hinge, a little bit of bend to the knees, almost a little bit like a deadlift, full power, reps only. Okay, now we take a look at the Kettlebell Sport swing where you have the pendulum leg action, where you have the double bent knees, where it's endurance only. You can pick up a 32 kilogram kettlebell even, and if you have a great grip, you can really go for a longer time, right? So not intense movement. And when, or not as intensive as the hardstyle swing, endurance geared. But when Steve Cotter taught me the hand-to-hand swing, I was like, that's something in between. Because then I can use moderate weights, and the mass that I bring to the table is 70 kilo body weight. So with a 24 kilogram, I can hinge only. All right, I'm swinging hand to hand, and I love you had a video about it, which was so enlightening for everybody to watch. It was like, yeah, that's what we tell people all the time. When you swing weights in front of you and you go with the weight, you go outside your center of mass, it pulls you away. So start relaxing your upper body a little bit so you can come closer to your center of mass, especially in the snatch. It is so important so that you get that feeling, right? So I developed a sense of idea that I got from Steve Cotter is I call it a hybrid swing, where you only hinge. You don't bend your knees. You're only hinging. You use moderate weights, and you do it for longer time. And I had a discussion with Kat's Kettlebell Dojo. She's from New Zealand. And we had this great discussion. I showed her this concept, and she was like, yeah, but you can do a hardstyle swing for longer sets of time. And I said, yes, but not if you do it according, like you say it now, according to powerlifting standards, which means heavy weights for low amount of reps. So then you do something in between. So that's why I came up with this hybrid idea, because Steve taught it to me, right?
Yes.
And it's just
great.
I love that.
It's and so intent plays a huge role in what are you trying to achieve? And so it's that I think is always, anytime you're setting out a program or doing anything, or what are we trying to achieve with this? And then are we using the best tools for this achievement? Are we using the, what is safest for that athlete at this juncture and this stage in their development, wherever that is, what is their understanding and knowledge of like either contract, relax, or what type of control do they have, and how, what tools are we gonna use to benefit them? And so it's when I use hard style stuff all the time. I mean, all the time. Yeah. But I like to try and develop it past that, and show again, like I guess I compare it often to like the kettlebell's kind of like a wrench, and you could use it like a hammer, and it usually weighs enough, the wrench does, to hammer something in. But then all of a sudden someone shows you how to use a wrench and you didn't know how to use that wrench. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. It works like this? You're like, oh, it's that type of tool. And a lot of times that kinetics of it and that relaxed tension, that is the beauty of what sport brought to it and brought to me, and was able to show me that, by taking slack out of the body, by breathing, by using only what is necessary, I can move a lot of weight, and I can move it for a very long time. And just you can move tonnages, right? In 10 minutes. And so it becomes fascinating. And so there's so many things that you can do and utilize, and directions you can go, and so many places. Definitely.
And
Definitely.
it still has so much potential
Yeah.
to explore and understand what you can do with it. Now, I have two things that I really like to get your take on. Now, when it comes to breathing, I always combine in the breathing that I do in almost any exercises with kettlebells. I use some form of power breathing that I have learned from Steve Cotter. And I also see it's also a kind of hybrid mentality that he uses, because when I see Pavel's power breathing method, it is way, I believe Pavel's power breathing method is not geared towards endurance work or just, even let's say power work. It's all strength, that right, where you don't even breathe out a lot, as far as I understand it. And Steve Cotter's power breathing is more like this, working, using your diaphragm and your lung like a pump. So this is
Yeah.
what I do when I do the movements, and I feel very, very awesome with it. But I also included another idea of breathing, the Valsalva breathing, right? Where you close it and keep tension, because I have discovered that I have some sense of shear sensitivity in my lower back.
Hmm.
And I always felt a little bit off after a jerk or a long cycle session. And then I saw one picture of Denis Vasilev where he was teaching the jerk, and it said, inhale. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, wow, really? So I tried this,
Yeah.
racking the weights. And before I go up, and another thing, that's what I learned, just because Kat said this, one of the keys that really unlocked the secrets to working intensively with kettlebell weights is your glutes, contracting them and working with your power center, right? So I rack the weights, I contract my glutes, and then what I do is I let the air in, and then once I'm in the top fixation and finish it, this is where the air goes out. And even in the backswing, and I'd like to get your take on it, when I go back into the rack, another breath, I drop the weight, and then I let it in. I let the backswing flow, I don't breathe out, I come back up, I breathe out again, boom. Since I've started incorporating this type of breathing technique, my back is perfectly fine, even with double 24s, and that's pretty heavy for my weight.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not an athlete, just but yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
so so what's your take on breathing, especially? You're heavy on breathing. I even saw this in the IG Live with Steve.
Right. So, all right. The so in what as far, all right, so especially with the jerk, I'll just take it to the jerk. Um, so because all right, elbows racked to the hips, and then when you get it overhead, and I had similar issues to you a little bit, was I would I would dump into my low back instead of moving through my thoracic spine in that overhead as I would extend up, right? So
Mm-hmm.
as you jerk up, you actually see Dennis do this, or he used to do this more in his younger years, and he does it less now. But like he would dump into that low back hard to like, and so you'd see it'd be like like when a gymnast finishes
Yeah,
there
the
when they land it and they arch up.
lumbar
Okay,
pelvic that pelvic
right,
tilt,
yes,
right?
yes, they're
Yeah.
opening that, and that unto itself puts a ton of pressure on that lumbar spine. So the down breath, the inhale, right, you can do it a number of ways, but when you inhale, you want to make sure that you're not inhaling into the chest. You're inhaling into the deepest of the respiratory muscles, which is actually going to be the very end of that is the quadratus lumborum. The quadratus
Wow.
lumborum
Yeah.
hooks from the top of the pelvis to the last rib.
Mm-hmm.
Laying over that and understanding this neurologically is really important. Is you have your hip flexors, right? So you have the
Yeah.
iliopsoas,
Yeah.
which attaches about L3, L4, and then lays down there. And because of its attachment to the spine, it can be incorporated into a respiratory muscle. Because when you breathe down and push the diaphragm down, it actually stretches that muscle and you're not locking it down. And that breath down will then create stability to the lower spine. So, depending upon how I'm teaching it, or if I'm teaching or who I'm talking to, the first thing I usually focus on is just the breath out, because they will inhale in. I will take I will take an inhale. Like, so after I've done, like, we'll say the exhale, right? The inhale naturally comes,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll feel that raise of basically of my belly against my
Yep.
elbows.
Yep.
And then I'm going to exhale into the jerk. As the bells are floating up, I'm inhaling underneath. And then I'm
Again.
exhaling standing up.
Wow. So you're inhaling when you're
Yes,
in
yes.
the
So
top,
after I've
almost in the top.
exhaled,
Yep.
so
In the
it's
second
an
dip.
exhale here, and then standing it up, bringing it
Wow.
down, exhaling as it hits, because I've inhaled into my low belly, low back. But that's where it becomes it's really important to learn to breathe diaphragmically, because the diaphragm and the QL and all of those things, getting your ribs to expand east and west, and getting your low back to expand with your breath and not actually change lumbar spine angle is really key.
Wow.
And again, that comes back to like every practice I do, like even if you were to sign up for my free 7-day savage shred, or whatever I call it.
I love
my
this.
free 7-day
Whatever I
savage
call it.
Right? I don't know. It's the free 7-day
love
savage shred. There is I do this developmental warm up in there, and I focus in on this because it ties everything that you do. It is the first gift given at birth.
Wow.
And it is so underrated and how powerful it is. If you think about it, your respiratory system is literally from your pelvis, like the body is dedicated from your pelvis to the top of your, to the nasal cavity, to the up here. Like that's how much your body is dedicated to breathing. And we don't think about it at all most of the time. I mean, you and I think about it, but like, in our average day, you don't think about it.
Yeah.
And just that learning.
And most people, just may interject, most people, when we are teaching just breathing, right? Power breathing, or I love what Funk Roberts said. Funk Roberts said, smell the roses.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Really breathing through the nose. So I always think about that cue, smell the roses, right? So people it's two things. First of all, they don't know how. And second is they somehow are ashamed of it, especially in the group setting. It's like, breathe loud. And they're like, so no. Right. Imagine like you're blowing out a candle. Now you got to lose. And then they look at you like.
Yeah.
So that's how far we have detached ourselves from this massive breathing machinery that we have. And one question, this breathing in the diaphragm, this system, is that included in your Ultimate Kettlebell Warrior program? If people who are watching are interested, the one for 149, right?
Yeah. And so, you got Black Friday sales,
Yeah, awesome. They're coming up.
He sounds that for a very terrible self-promotion. No, I do. I talk about it. I talk about it a lot. And I spend a lot of time talking about it. So like how, with that program, how I have it set up is that there's like kettlebell days of like dynamic kettlebell movement. And the Ultimate Kettlebell Warrior, I do a lot of, it's more of an advanced program. So there's 3 days of kind of what would be like kettlebell metabolic conditioning. And on those days, you have about a 20 to 25 minutes of this developmental warm up and movement and breathing. And then it goes into, another 20 or, 20 minutes of like intense kettlebell work. And then you go into, I do a lot of PNF stretching. So that proprioceptive.
I saw that as well.
Yeah.
I have,
wow. Oh, go on.
Yeah, I have so much material that I want to ask you, but we're so short. We're so short on time. That's why, man. I gotta get you on a second time, of course.
I'd love to.
And just on a final note, so just to get it clear, if people want to learn more about this, I know it's an advanced program, but the breathing, this idea, all the stuff that we talked about is in your program for 149, right?
Yeah, and it's also I also go into it now. I don't go as deep into the breathing on my Savage Shred program, which is like $97, and it'll be on sale for I think $77 here. But it's a similar pattern in that I always go over this stuff. It's just in my Ultimate Kettlebell Warrior, I spend more time.
The new one, right? That's the new one that you just released. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So on a final note, Bill, two things. Do you think, when you talk to people like David Weck, when I've read some stuff about coiling, right? The coil swing. And even, when you even had some experience from the field now with somebody telling you, yeah, if you're able to shift your weight on one leg, yeah, you're actually faster. And you also said, there it's debatable still, right? Because in today's day and age that we live in, right, somebody always comes up with a new idea, and in so many cases it doesn't trump the basics that we have been exposed to for years. So my question would be, do you think there are boundaries to this stuff? Boundaries to when it comes to rotation, boundaries to when it comes to this idea that David proposed to you? Because, and let me preface this real quick, Professor McGill told me that somebody visited him once and gave him this bottle that's filled with water. I forgot the name.
Right. Oh yes, I know what you're talking about. It's like slosh pipes.
Slosh pipes, right? Yeah. And then they had the slosh pipe do some crazy movement where the lumbar spine always gets twisted. And he was like, "No, I cannot support this program because this is going to destroy your athletes." And the guy that was proposing the program to Professor McGill was like, "You're stupid." And then one year he came back and he was like, "Oh, Professor McGill, you were right." Right? So what's your take on somebody who's exploring the depths and wants to even expand the world of kettlebells? Do you think we have any boundaries? Because there's so much stuff on social where people get caught up and it's like, oh my God, right?
Well, there's always boundaries, right? But boundaries can be pushed, but they're always pushed by truly understanding the basics, and that's, and like, it's, you have to really have a very deep understanding of like basic human mechanics. And I think if you do, think of it this way, look at like a Cirque du Soleil performer. Look at what they do.
Yeah.
And now they're athletes and they're pushing those levels, but like even their most basic exercises, I can't do them. I'm not equipped to do them. I haven't molded my body in that way. And that's one of the things I really anymore I think a lot about is I don't think about working out. I think about molding. And like what type of thing can I mold today? Because this is an interesting fact so NASA probably has some of the most data on exercise science, because they put an astronaut in a foreign space and they're completely weightless. And so one of the biggest things they do is reduce bone density. So when an astronaut spends 2 weeks in space, they've actually figured out how that they can completely take bone density to zero. And they basically have this, like, it's heavy weightlifting for an hour. They dedicate an hour a day to it, but it's really, the time under tension is probably 12 to 15 minutes. But it's that type of stimulus. It looks like a big clamp that they deadlift and squat with, but that will reduce their bone density to zero. Like they'll lose none. But the interesting thing is that still one of the hardest things for them to do is come back and walk. And one of the reasons is because they've lost all the calluses on the bottom of their feet.
So
they're now, because they hook in, they've molded to their environment. And we mold that much to our environment. We don't think about it. And that's where like breath comes in. We don't think about that, like that, because it's not conscious, but we're actually pulling air into the body. And then as we're doing that, we're molding this system. How are we pulling that air in? What are we doing with it? Right. And so then also the stimulus, like what I love about the kettlebell is that the kettlebell is this consistent stimulus. So when we think about like muscle mass and gaining muscle mass, muscles are really adaptive. They'll adapt in 30 days. You'll start gaining more muscle mass. Your tendons take about 180. So if you can stay consistent with a weight, you can get your tendons to adapt. And now that you've started thickening and getting this connective, this whole myofascial system stronger, and it's not just this muscular pump, but the whole system is actually stronger, you can start pushing those levels. But it takes patience and it takes consistent molding, where most of us don't have that. And so it depends. Like that slosh pipe, it could, it could, but here's the thing. Most of your athletes can't lay on their back and keep a neutral spine and know how to breathe down into their diaphragm. So maybe we should adjust that. Most of them have such compensation that their cervical spine is really tight because it reflects what the lumbar spine is doing, and they can't get to a neutral head position. And so now that shifting side to side that we've been talking about, that coiling side to side, it can't happen because you don't have basic human mechanics. You don't have those developmental mechanics that were given to you at birth that set you up to be bipedular. And so if you don't have those, then it's not worth talking about the rest of it. And so it's systematic in my mind of that, like you have to have your foundation fully set. And you have to be able to control yourself. And then once we get there, like you need those. And then those techniques that we talk about, that shifting side to side, they can be practiced, unloaded, they can be, but you have to be able to control your ribs and where you're at and be able to get into the position.
It's advanced, dedicated to elite movers, right? Who really understand the kinesthetics, who really feel the spine, feel the mover, are connected to all those important muscle groups that need to work. And now that you're talking about molding, see, that's a beautiful thing when you had this podcast and talk to so many people. I was talking to a professional mountaineering, his name's Andy Kirkpatrick, and he was climbing that one, I forgot it. I think it's doesn't matter. It's just
Kilimanjaro.
No. A steep wall. I think it's in. He climbed it for 30 times. That steep wall. It's in the States.
Yes.
Not Saint something. Oh, whatever. I think we talk about the same.
I think I did.
Right.
But I get your idea.
Yeah. And so he was talking to me, and listen to this. It was like, you know what's funny? And I also work as a tour guide, he said. And he said the people who are breakdown first are marathon runners. People who do have this massive amount of endurance. And I was like, yeah, but climbing is endurance, right? He said, yeah. But also, and he said this, he said, it's kind of a bin man's fitness. It's not you got to be the strongest and you got to or have the best endurance. He talked about, of course, the idea of understanding the mechanics of climbing, and I believe it's mindset, the way he talked about stuff. He was like, and he has an English accent, and we had such a great conversation. It was like, one day I was like, I was with my wife in the storm, and we had to dig into a snow hole, and in that snow hole I was for 3 weeks. I was like, what? What does that mean, 3 weeks? 3 weeks, I was just laying there. Or 2 weeks. And he said,
What?
2 weeks in a snow hole. And he said, what is a snow hole? He's like, you got to dig a snow hole when the storm comes and you got to get shelter. And then I was laying there for 2 weeks. And he said, the problem is you cannot lift, you cannot work out, you cannot move. And people break down, and that's a hardcore setting. But he said many athletes break down because they cannot lift, they cannot train, they cannot move. And then they reduce themselves to this bin man's fitness, like he calls it.
Yes.
And now that you're mentioning the mold, I'm like, you got to be molded to be a professional, to climb these mountains.
Right.
And even if you are a professional kettlebell athlete or a professional powerlifter, breaking world records, if you're not molded to mountaineering or climbing, the mountain's going to eat you probably. So yeah, it's powerful stuff, Bill. Well, and we got to quit right now. I was so fascinating talking to you. One final thing, Bill.
Yes.
I'm setting this thing up that I call Kettlebell Avengers.
Yes.
And we already had one conversation with Luca from Canada, with Cap from New Zealand, and it was me, it was 3 of us. And so what I'm trying to do is I'll get you on the list. I send an email, and the next Kettlebell Avengers date will be somewhere in January. And then we'll have 5 spots. And I got folks like Professor McGill, Dan John, you, Steve Carter, all these heavyweights. And what I want to do is I want to get you all, maybe 5 of us, on a podcast and have conversations. So my question is, would you want to participate in
Yeah, man, I would love to. I've never talked to McGill. I think that would be so cool.
Yo,
I could glean so much.
Yeah, that was with him. It's all these guys.
They're amazing, right? They're like our heroes. They're who we looked up to. So,
most definitely.
Yeah, of course I would.
Awesome.
Of course, that would be an honor. Thank you.
Awesome. That's awesome. So, Bill, let's set up a second one in a month or something, and we have another conversation, because I got to pick your mind on so much stuff. I just scratched the surface.
Well, this was fun, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I truly appreciate it as well. So I'll catch you on the next one, and what's your time and date now? Time now?
It is now 11:50 a.m.
A.M. All right. So mine is 7.
What time is it for you?
6:50 p.m.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in Switzerland.
Yes.
All right.
Finishing your day.
Yes,
Man, I really appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. It's so important.
Yeah.
I love it. I've been a fan before.
Oh,
and
thank
so
you very
that's
much.
what's hilarious. When you reached out to me, I was like, I looked at my wife. I'm like, hey, look.
Oh, no, stop it, man. Oh, that gives me goosebumps. When heavyweights like you say this, I'm like, oh, I must be on the right track.
Yes. So I appreciate what you do, because you bring so much enlightenment just
Wow.
across the board. So thank you.
I truly appreciate it. The world of kettlebells is dominated by 2 training styles called hardstyle and Kettlebell Sport. Although vastly different in nature, they have been proven to work and give you the most bang for your buck whenever you pick up a kettlebell, if you understand them correctly and are able to differentiate between the two. If you are a beginner, this task might be understandably confusing. Enter the hybrid style and discover how to combine the best of both worlds. The hybrid style masterclass is a 10-week practice-based online course that will help you take your kettlebell skills to an elite level, made in Switzerland. Learn what's been holding you back and how to become a versatile kettlebell master without having to piece together countless YouTube videos or rely on a gym membership. The price of the hybrid style masterclass is $397 per month for 3 months. Save 20% with a one-time payment of $997. We'll open registration only to a small number of new students every 3 months. Join the waiting list now to get access 24 hours before the general public. Link is in the description.